The Trump DOJ is indicting a former Trump official from the first term. National Security Advisor John Bolton, who served the Trump administration, indicted late today by a grand jury. The case involves allegations of mishandling classified information. Now, this is a lengthy indictment. Unlike some of the recent cases we've been covering, we've got about 26 pages that we've been flipping through, and they are trying to make a big case out of it. There's technically 18 criminal counts here that involve the retention, that is holding on to or saving, and the transmission, that is sharing national defense information. Now, it details an account that begins in about 2018 in August, where the government says Bolton was abusing his position as NSA, sharing more than 1,000 pages of information about his day-to-day activities with what they describe as two unauthorized individuals. So under the rules here, they're not trying to name or shame those people. What we have reporting that suggests it's his family, his wife and daughter, who were involved in what his lawyer says today was basically a diary. But the DOJ is saying that this involved the unlawful retention of documents, writings, and notes relating to national defense in his own home. And then they used the same D word, saying it was diary-like entries with, this is where they say the legal problem comes in, with, the government says, classified information, transcribing handwritten notes from his day's activities into word processing documents sent through a commercial, non-governmental messaging application to his wife and daughter. And I could just tell you that's a lot of legal language, but just to break that down into plain English, they are saying that during his government service and after, he was keeping notes or diary entries that involved or included classified information, and that he was sharing that, and whether it's with his family or anyone else, even a single person under the law that is unauthorized can be, of course, the unlawful transmission of said information. So that's the core of this case. And while there are issues around whether Donald Trump likes another targeting of someone that, while once was his aide, is now had been a public critic, we'll get to that. But on the law here, Bolton's own attorneys say this was cleared up a long time ago and that it's known that he kept diaries. That's not a crime. They say they look forward to proving that Ambassador Bolton did not unlawfully share or store any such information. Now, Bolton is among a list of people that we have seen suddenly get indictments after Donald Trump had generally and sometimes publicly demanded more action on his so-called revenge list. We knew that FBI agents had already searched Bolton's home and office. That was earlier this summer, seizing documents. And this case may be different from some others. Remember that the Bolton probe, the underlying search for whether there was misconduct around classified information, began before Donald Trump even came into office. Trump didn't name him a target regardless of evidence, as he did say with Comey, and career prosecutors in Maryland have been looking at exactly this case for a longer period of time. As for the pressure campaign that we've been covering, well, you have former FBI Director Comey and New York Attorney General James named and then indicted. You have these other individuals who have been pursued. And so this entire set of actions at DOJ do come under this cloud. And remember, if you look at this and say, how could you ignore an environment where the DOJ has broken the rules and protocol? We heard this week from Jack Smith, who described in detail why he, a DOJ prosecutor veteran, understood and knew that the process they used against, for example, FBI Director Comey was wrong, that it looked like they were building the case against the person rather than following the evidence to see where it led. And yet, one other thing you have to keep in mind is Donald Trump has been very happy to have anyone that he dislikes get in trouble. That can be true even if, in addition, the underlying evidence was reviewed or began being developed earlier on. We will follow this case and see whether there is a sort of a stench or a cloud over it based on the way Donald Trump has acted. As for the defendant here, remember, you can work for Donald Trump for a long time. You can be very loyal to him in government and politics, etc. And if you break with him at all, you may find yourself on the other side of his criticisms and targeting. And so as other people in the country, Republicans, people in the MAGA movement, people on Wall Street, people who say, well, if you just stay quiet or support Trump, you'll be okay, as a practical matter. This would be a first big domino showing that may not work either, because remember, John Bolton has spent the bulk of his public career as a conservative, hawkish Republican in good standing in the Republican Party who rose all the way up to a top official in Trump's first term.
the separation of powers. It is critical to the survival of the constitutional system. It's the kind of leadership that's been completely absent from the Clinton-Gore administration. I think it's the kind of leadership President Bush would provide. I will continue to work closely with members of Congress to advance President Bush's policies. The president spoke quite clearly at that point in Germany today when he said Israel had a right to self-defense. We're not going to engage in the talks unless and until there's a full and verifiable suspension by Iran of its uranium enrichment activities.
And the State Department needs a cultural revolution. Donald Trump is a strong personality, has strong views, he's got a strong resolve, which makes him the polar opposite of Barack Obama. Live with North Korea with nuclear weapons, which Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, is prepared to do, or look at military force. These are not attractive options. We're here where we are today because of the pressure that the Trump administration has put on North Korea. They've never seen an American president this tough before.
That's how John Bolton sounded for the majority of his public career, life, and tenure. And the criticisms he's since voiced leaving office about Donald Trump tend to involve evidence, foreign policy, substance. He is someone who basically says that he is the conservative hawk, and when he disagrees with people he's worked for or people in public life, he will make that case. That's as American as any other discourse or democracy. And whether you like or dislike John Bolton's foreign policy, this is one of those charges that will be heard in a lot of different places than some of the other targeting this year. That is, if you give any credence to what his lawyers say, that he is innocent, and they argue this case is not on the level. I want to bring in our experts tonight, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, an MSNBC analyst, former FBI General Counsel and Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissmann, also an analyst here. Andrew, your response to this charge, I've tried to basically mention the two factors, that there is a longer case record here, and you can look at the evidence, and these national security information cases can be a little wonky. But on the other hand, this is not a DOJ in the last few months that's entitled to great automatic deference for every criminal case it has brought. Your thoughts?
I do think with this one, you need to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. These are serious charges. There's no question, as someone who is in the intelligence community, you cannot send classified information, including what's alleged top secret information, that really, they have some descriptions, short ones, about the nature of the information. It is not quite as jaw-dropping as what we saw in the Mar-a-Lago case, but it is significant. He sent that over unclassified communication systems, Gmail, that's a fancy way of saying it, sent it over Gmail. You obviously know you can't do that. And sent it to two people, albeit his wife and his daughter, but still people who are not cleared to get it. And that risk manifested itself because, in fact, there was a hack. And so these are serious. There's also precedent for it. General Petraeus did something very similar to this. He was charged. Now, he was dealt with in a very different way, but it remains to be seen what happens here. It's also the case that, unlike the other charges with James Comey and Letitia James, there's a slew of career people who signed this indictment. At the very last page, you see what you normally would see, sort of trial attorneys, AUSAs. So all of that is sort of on the one hand. And as somebody in the intelligence community previously, I really do take this incredibly seriously. The reason you have to keep two things in mind at the same time is that there are two systems of justice going on. Donald Trump was alleged to do something far worse in many ways, with many more documents and two forms of obstruction of justice. Pete Hegseth used Signal, which is also not a secure system for classified information, to what I think has to be classified information that was highly sensitive. And you don't see Pete Hegseth being investigated at all. I would note that Jack Smith, in the interview that I conducted, said that any administration, any normal one, would have opened a criminal case on that. So I think there's sort of two things going on at the same time. And I have to tell you, I think the most serious is two systems of justice, because that is something that's a systemic flaw, a systemic problem with what's going on in America.
Joyce?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew, and I think the point he's making is exactly the right one. When we talk about selective and vindictive prosecution, this is a selective prosecution of John Bolton for very similar conduct to what Donald Trump was indicted for and what there's public reporting that Pete Hegseth did. That, I think, is something that Abbe Lowell, the very capable lawyer representing Bolton, will force the court to address. But while that's true, I don't think it does anything to undercut what we read in this indictment. This is an indictment that you would expect to see from professional prosecutors. It's very different than the Eastern District of Virginia indictments that we've seen involving Jim Comey and Letitia James. There's a 20-page factual predicate for the charges that are brought against Bolton, 18 of them, for both retention of classified material and, more seriously, in my view, for transmitting it, as Andrew was discussing, through these unsecure lines of communication. I mean, I simply can't imagine sending a Gmail home at the end of the day that contained classified information. It's almost as though Bolton was carving out time during his day to begin writing his book and sending the information to his editors, albeit family members, in a non-secure form.